Morning, I'll call the meeting to order. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. I'll introduce the members of the panel today. To my far left is Mr. Kent Seelan. To my immediate left is Ms. Lynn Nesbitt. My name is Stu McPherson. I'll be chairing the hearing today. Representing the City of Winnipeg Assessment Taxation Department, Mr. Rob Lucky, and the recording secretary for today's hearing is Ms. Katie Sutherland. We'll be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application. We'll limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony. Anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Please be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council. It's independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I'll confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We'll then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they so wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave and the process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You'll receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. Just as information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. Let me swear the parties in, please. If you do have a cell phone, please put that on silent.
Robert Allen Lucky.
Do you swear that the evidence you present is the truth, all the truth, and the truth, all the truth?
Yes.
Do you swear that the evidence you present is the truth, all the truth, and the truth, all the truth?
I do.
Morning, Mr. Smith.
Good morning.
You're here representing the owners of 7 properties on the docket today, and it's the amount of assessed value only that we're dealing with?
That's correct.
Thank you. We'll just deal with them as in the order that they're listed on the docket. So, Mr. Assessor, the first property we'll hear is 102 Marlowe Court. When you're ready, we'll hear your evidence, please.
Thank you. 102 Marlowe Court is file number 19-1770. Roll number is 0500507300. We have the category is commercial row house. These are there's 5 buildings. They're 4 units each. They're built in 1971. Pretty much all of these buildings are owned by Manitoba Housing or their sponsor groups. Page 2A, I have a site plan and okay, yeah, Marlowe Court is just off Maple Glen, which is just slightly north of Inkster and Shepherd. I wrote on the corner, the far right corner is the Coca-Cola bottling company on Inkster. And 2B is street view of the buildings. We have 23 bedroom units. Our average income and For the most part, we agree on income, and this one we agree on NOI, so the only issue is cap rate. Our cap rate for this building is 5.3, and 5.3 is our cap rate for buildings that are 1974 and older down to 1949. So this is at the top end of the 5.3 range of cap rate properties. That's what all I have to say. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, questions for the assessor?
Yes, thank you. Just as with common ownership for all of these properties today, just a general overall question. For the current cycle, given workload, you probably haven't had an opportunity to visit them.
I wasn't.
For the current cycle.
For this cycle, I haven't been in any of the buildings. Some of the buildings I've been in a long time ago.
Okay, so they may
Not
have
recently.
changed since that time.
They could have changed.
Condition.
Yeah. This building, these buildings I've been by, I'm familiar with them, but I haven't been in them recently.
Okay. The valuation from the city, this is all model driven, there's no changes that look to be made to it when I looked at it.
That's correct.
Okay. And with regard to capitalization rate, I think you had said size and age was the driver for the cap rate?
Excuse me. This building isn't affected by size, but it's affected by age. So
Okay.
if it was 4 years newer, it would be 5 cap. This age group is 5.3.
Okay. In the city's model, given that the city wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to see all commercial properties, I imagine that there isn't any specific adjustment allowed for in cap rate with regard to condition in the model, I imagine. Is that fair to say?
No, condition doesn't really warrant a cap rate adjustment.
Okay, those are all of my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Seeland, questions for the assessor?
Do you know of any renovations that have been done here since last time we were affected?
I had looked, I didn't see any relevant permits for renovations. There could have, if they didn't require permits, there could be, but I also haven't been in the buildings.
Okay.
I don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt?
Yeah, can you just give me again the age of 1949, 1973 is the cap rate range?
1949 to 1974,
1974?
and then 1975 and up is 5. So we'll have both. And there's also, for small buildings, I think if we get to some of the little projects in here, there'll be a lower cap rate yet. Like, so the small buildings, we have a cap rate that goes into the 4s, 4 point, depending on the size.
But you said in this case, there's been no adjustment to your bottom
No,
line.
because it's over, if it's over a certain size.
What is that size?
15,000 square feet.
15? And that's the gross floor area of 15?
Right.
That's gross, okay. So if it's lower, all right.
Right, it's not intended to include the basements. Some of these have basements, some don't.
Right,
It's supposed to include the livable area.
okay. And you've not inspected the property recently to compare, heard
No,
you saying?
right,
So you can't speak to its condition.
correct.
Would condition normally affect a cap rate?
Not really.
So if it's in a 1971 condition, everything is sort of...
Well, the condition dictates the income,
Yeah.
expenses. So if the building's not maintained, the expenses are going to be high.
So
And if it's not maintained, the rent's going to be low. So then you're taking a low NOI and capitalizing it. With the reverse, if the building's in mint condition and gets high rent, the cap rate is normally about the same too.
I know you suggested that there was no issue with the NOI, but I was looking at that expenses of 49% for a MHRC property in 1971 build. Is that, I've heard other discussions saying that's low for this type of property. And this,
It's low for apartments
okay,
of Manitoba housing,
Okay.
but typically in townhouses, the tenants pay the heat.
okay.
So that's a huge, heat and electrical, so that's a huge component of the expenses.
Okay.
When you're looking at like privately owned townhouse, row house type of property, it would be a lot lower than 50% because you're not paying the owner isn't paying utilities typically.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this being a new hearing, I'm going to ask this question again. The cap rates, is there any differentiation between a townhouse and an apartment for cap rates? No, they're the same.
Actually, just to follow up on the other question, if you look on page 4, all the comparable townhouses, heat included in rent, no. So that's why the expenses are lower for townhouses.
And generally, the cap rate, like you said, this one isn't affected by size or location,
Right.
but those are the three major factors or components that would affect the cap rate normally in the model, would it not?
Well, we make adjustments to the cap rate. There's a higher cap rate for one of the areas in the north end.
So that'd be a locational factor?
Right, and then there's a slight premium in St. Boniface area, where the rental market, for whatever reason, maybe the St. Boniface Hospital is quite strong.
So rather than a premium, it's actually a downward adjustment, is it not?
It's a lower cap rate, I call it a premium, but yeah,
Right.
higher cap rate in the north end, lower cap rate. We don't have any St. Boniface ones here, so it doesn't really matter, but
And you said that condition is reflected in your rent and or your expenses rather
Right.
than in a cap rate?
right.
That's my questions. Thank you. Mr. Smith, we'll hear from you, please.
Okay, so 102 Marlowe Court is the property we're dealing with. All the properties we're dealing with here on the docket today are Manitoba home housing properties. And a lot of what I say for the first property will, of course, be applicable to all of them. So there'll be more discussion for this first one, and it can carry forward for the remainder. With regard to, I guess, some of the discussion that has just come up with regard to capitalization rate. I do have to add in on that. So when when you have a property that's in say below average condition, or in well, yes, in below average condition, that's going to impact the rent that that property can achieve on the marketplace. So if you're a tenant and you're out there and you have building A and building B, one is in lower condition, you are going to pay less to rent there if you if you're willing to go there. That's just how the market works. That's one aspect. It's not double counting when you look at the cap rate, and the condition of the property also impacts the capitalization rate on the property. It's not that condition doesn't have an impact on capitalization rate. It certainly does, and that's borne out by evidence in the marketplace. So yes, there's a lot of factors that go into looking at a cap rate. I understand why a mass appraisal model, where you can't visit all of the commercial and multifamily properties in the city and know what their condition is, can't specifically account for condition of properties, and to some extent, I imagine that the year breakdown it is an attempt to account for that in some manner, where the properties below 1974 get a slightly higher cap rate, 1949 to 74, pretty broad range, and then 75 and above get 5%, etc. So my understanding of that is that it's an attempt to take into account both the age of the structure, but also likely some conditional factors as well. As an investor on the marketplace, if you're looking at the purchase of a property and it's in below average condition with deferred maintenance, etc., looking at the property as it is for what it is, not what any future potential, which I'm sure will come up. Looking at the property as it is, you're obviously going to pay a lower value for that property, which is going to drive a higher capitalization rate because of the condition. You have items that you have to repair. You may have to put money into fixing any number of things on that property. So your capital costs are going to be higher. That is going to impact your return, and you're going to pay a higher cap rate for that property. That's the standard theory with regard to valuation, whether it be appraisal or assessment. So yes, condition does have a factor in determining capitalization rate. I understand why it can't be accounted for in the model, but it is certainly a factor that impacts that side as well. So the subject property itself, as stated, built in 1971, it is row housing, built by Manitoba Housing, and we are looking at 23-bedroom townhome units. So Manitoba Housing's mandate, of course, is to serve low-income residents and provide them with affordable housing in the marketplace based on their income. So the subject property, as all of them that we look at today, is built to accommodate the most people that they can in a relatively small area. So you tend to have smaller bedrooms. The finishes that are put in place are of a lower grade, and it's very basic accommodation. That's essentially the mandate of Manitoba Housing. The subject property is in poor to very poor condition. Manitoba Housing had actually originally designated this particular property for demolition and rebuilding, and that has not occurred at this point in time. But that is what has been indicated to me by the ownership, Manitoba Housing, that has been considered an option for this particular property. I think if you go through the photos of the property, it gives you an indication of condition for the property as well. Now, obviously, location is a driver of value as well. What I would point out with regard to Manitoba housing properties is that given the market segment that they're mandated to serve, they do tend to have more wear and tear than standard apartments, and you can have bad condition whether you're in River Heights or the North End, based on that particular aspect of these properties. So photos are shown on pages 4 through 7, I guess it is. You can see the property itself. The site is shown on page 8 and the location on page 9. So it is located in a residential area just north of Inkster Park there. The income and expense, we can get to the actual valuation. So with regard to Manitoba housing properties, given their mandate of providing affordable housing, they provide this service on a rent geared to income basis. So the rent paid by the occupants of these properties is based on the income that the resident has, so it can vary quite widely, and it's generally considerably lower than what the projected modeled rent for the properties is. So it is no reliable basis on which to determine a market value, so we don't place any reliance upon that, and that we need to look at the market for appropriate rents. So subject property, three-bedroom units, 20 of them in poor to very poor condition. We've given you the CMHC stats. There's not a lot of three-bedroom units that are out there on the marketplace as well, so there's not a lot of reliance that can be placed on that necessarily either. If you look at West Kildonan, in fact, there's no particular stat for three-bedroom units for townhomes that are out there. We did look at the modeling from the city of Winnipeg, and given the size and condition of these units, we felt that the rental rate on average of $994 is appropriate. So we have used that as our income basis as well. The 3% vacancy rate is borne out by the statistics in the market. While if you look at page number 11 and the market stats with regard to vacancy, there's no particular vacancy stat for three bedrooms in West Kildonan, but an overall average for Winnipeg CMA is 2.9%, suburban areas of 3.5%, so certainly 3% is an appropriate rate. Looking at the expense side of the property, the actual expenses for the property, there's obviously significant repair and maintenance that has to happen here. Their expenses are considerably higher than one would expect for a property of this size at this point, so we can't place any reliance on those either in determining a fair market value. It would drive too low a value, so we are in agreement with the city with regard to the expense allowance that is used for the subject property. So we can move on to capitalization rate from there. Again, all of our properties here today are of the same ownership, same structure essentially, so all of my commentary here is meant to carry forward for the remainder of the properties as well. So we'll just cover this fairly quickly. If you look at my page number 13 for capitalization rate, the challenge with determining market value for social and affordable and public housing is that there's essentially no capitalization rates from other social and affordable and or public housing properties that are out there, in that there are There are a very small number of these properties that trade and or are transferred essentially from one organization to another, things of that nature. But there is no market level net operating income that they are purchased upon. They're not sold for a profit basis, and you can't rely upon the in-place net operating income, obviously, from what we've shown on the subject properties. So there are no cap rates for these type of properties out there to point to say this is the range in which they should trade. So that's one aspect. Comparing them to standard market apartment transactions is not, you can't directly compare them as there are considerable restrictions and burdens for these particular type of social and affordable public housing properties that you don't have for market apartments. These include obviously rental income restrictions, rental market restrictions, that being the smaller pool of tenants. Additional operating expenses, as we've noted, operating expenses tend to be higher in public housing facilities, whether they be row housing and or apartment properties, standard apartment properties. The physical condition of the properties, as already mentioned, they do tend to have more wear and tear, and in some cases deferred maintenance. And upon disposition, there are other restrictions as well that would be faced by any potential vendor and or purchaser that would have an impact on market value. You have these properties that are set up under a certain structure with a certain mandate. You have residents that are in place on a legal basis, and they have the right to continue forward in that fashion according to the agreements that have been signed, and any lease that they would have in place, or a rental agreement. So these factors obviously are not present for standard market apartments. There's an appraiser out of the United States, an accredited appraiser by their governing appraisal body, Mr. Richard Polton. He's an expert in this particular field, and he has written a book entitled Valuation and Market Studies for Affordable Housing. And in this book, he states, developing a market-derived cap rate for an income-restricted property begins with an analysis of the available rates for similar unrestricted properties. Then these rates are adjusted based on the risk factors that an investor would consider in developing a cap rate. The result is a cap rate based on market factors and associated risks. In the final analysis, property tax assessment must take into account the public purpose of the project, the overall benefits and burdens, and the restricted nature of the operating rents. So essentially, the model is that you need to look at standard market transactions and the cap rates that are produced there, and then attribute the risk premium to those capitalization rates to derive a fair market capitalization rate. So what we have done is look at our own capitalization rate study as shown on page number 13, and then look at the main commercial real estate brokerages and the capitalization rate studies that they provide as a level of backup, essentially, and further vetting of the cap rates determined. So our cap rates that are shown on page number 13 are properties that were purchased for the in-place net operating income. These properties had already been renovated. There was no additional upside to these particular properties. If you bought it, you could not increase the revenue by investing into kitchens, bathrooms, etc. that had already been done. The revenue had been maximized. So what you were buying was what was in place. So these are true cap rates. There's no element of future lift in value based on adjustment, repositioning in the marketplace, essentially. So cap rates that we have, obviously there's some range in terms of size, location, age of structure, essentially. It would be great to have a few newer ones. However, what we've found in the marketplace is that the vast majority of properties that were being sold and purchased within the relevant time frame were bought for repositioning in the marketplace. So any cap rate that was derived was not based on the in-place net income. It was based on what that future return to the purchaser would be, which of course invalidates it as a cap rate to be relied upon. So our cap rates range between a low of 5.44% at 333 Ward, the in-place net operating income essentially agreed to by both the city and the appellant's agent was 5.25%. The 5.44% is representative of efficiencies that the purchaser knew that they could achieve. They're a very large organization, very knowledgeable, own a large number of multifamily properties, and looking at the operating expenses, they were aware that they could create efficiencies and that would impact the return to them. So they bought it on that basis and have subsequently made those changes, and the cap rate is proven out by that. That's the background there. The other properties, you can see the range of them. Yes, some of them are older. All of them have been obviously renovated significantly since that time. Recent renovations, so the rents were at the higher end of market, and you can see that they range in size as well. The general range that we're seeing there is from that 5.5 to 6, 6.5, 6.65 at the very upper end is what we were seeing. So that is our capitalization rate study. We can go through that if you wish. The main commercial market brokerages are essentially they put out cap rate studies that are representative of investment grade properties and what their impression and their investors' impressions are of what would be paid in a particular marketplace for a particular asset class. So that's the basis of how these are determined, essentially. So if we look at Collier's on page number 14, I have both the 2016 and 2018 cap rate study or cap rate charts there from them. They're indicating for low-rise apartments that in Winnipeg in 2016 they have a range of 5.25% to 6%. In 2018 that range is 5 to 6%. The C.D. Richard Ellis information on page 2015 essentially indicates a flat line, and they're indicating low-rise A's at 5.5 to 6%, low-rise B's at 5.75 to 6% in the city of Winnipeg in both 2016 and 2018. So no change between the years. And if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, another C.D. Richard Ellis chart, historical Winnipeg cap rates. If you look at the bottom line, that represents multifamily capitalization rates, and they're essentially saying cap rates have been flatlined since roughly 2014 forward. So they have really seen no measurable change in that time frame with regard to multifamily caps. Now, the point of presenting the market brokerage information is for comparative purposes. So they're looking at investment grade properties in the city of Winnipeg for multifamily. Manitoba Housing would not be considered investment grade properties, certainly. So at a starting point, you're looking at the upper end of what is being projected by the brokerage houses, and that being, if you look at both of them, 6% for the 2018 cycle and 6% prior to that time frame as well, with a very stable trend indicating that going back in time as well. So 6% is essentially the starting point for what you're looking at. The subject property, we're looking at 3-bedroom units, again, somewhat higher number of bedrooms than is standard in the marketplace. Generally, you're looking at 1- and 2-bedroom units in standard market apartments. They do put some 3 bedrooms in on occasion, but by and large, 1 and 2 is the dominant trend and the most in demand in the marketplace. But more importantly than that, the property is in obviously very poor condition. It was considered for demolition by the ownership and rebuilding because they're a public entity. We've used a capitalization rate of 6.5% to reflect this in our valuation. And that gives us our market value of $1,805,000. The addendum materials just include the income expense, the market brokerage reports, and I may have included a couple of supportive decisions from the 2020 cycle in the back. So that is my presentation, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you. Mr. Lucky, questions for the applicant?
You said that the rents are restricted for these types of properties. What do you mean by that?
Well, the rents that are charged to the occupants are based on the income that those occupants generate, and you have to have a low enough income in order to qualify to get into Manitoba housing. So the rents that are produced are obviously well below market, and we're not relying upon those rents to determine a fair market value.
Well, isn't it just a percent of your income?
It is a percent of your income, yes, but you have to have a low enough income in order to qualify to get in.
So if Manitoba Housing were to put this on the open market, there's no registered rents against these suites, is there?
The rents are not registered, no, as it would depend upon the occupant that was in place for each unit.
So the occupant could be given notice, or the property could be redeveloped and the new owner could charge whatever they want for rent, because there is no rents registered against any of these suites, is there?
They're not, well, as noted, they can't be registered as they change dependent on the individual occupant. But no, I would disagree. The mandate of the ownership is such that they have to provide low income residents with affordable housing. So these people are in there signed up on agreements, and they have the legal right to remain in place going forward on that basis. We've had this discussion with with the rentals board as well, and just given them the basic background and asked opinion with regard to that, and the indication was that yes, if you're in those suites and you're paying and you've signed an agreement, then yes, you would have the right to remain in place on that basis until the term of your lease or agreement expired.
So what's the agreement?
I'm sorry?
What's the agreement? Like what kind of agreement do they sign?
Well,
do they sign
obviously the occupants have to sign an agreement with Manitoba Housing when they take occupancy.
And isn't there in the agreement, they could get notice to leave? Like they don't have a life estate there, do they?
No, they don't have a life estate, Mr. Lucky, that's clear.
So they could be given notice to leave?
They, as indicated, they sign their agreements as you would sign a lease in other standard market apartments, and they have the right to remain in place on that basis until the end of that term, and you can't just evict them at the end of that either.
Well, if Manitoba Housing wants to redevelop this property, they're going to evict everybody, aren't they?
There's legislation in place such, and obviously the residential tenancies branch is the governing body for such things, and their indication is that the tenants in place have the standard rights, and they would be able to remain in place.
Well, how are they going to redevelop the property if the tenants stay in there? You said that the property is slated to be redeveloped. So if Manitoba Housing redevelops it, they have to get everybody out of there, don't they?
Yes, and there's guidelines for that too. If it's in such a condition that the property needs to be extensively repaired or demolished, then they have the ability to do that if they're replacing it, which is what the intent is. They're not redeveloping the site, they're putting up essentially the same type of housing if they do ultimately choose to go in that direction. I've had other Manitoba housing properties which have been larger that have had segments of the individual buildings on a larger site that had to be demolished and were then replaced with essentially the same building with modern building techniques because of the condition of them.
No further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Sealand, questions?
Is this property location in West Kildonan or Old Kildonan, or is it north end?
It would be West Kildonan.
West Kildonan?
Yeah.
The documentation that I have here that was prepared shows documentation for 145 Power Street. Was that part of your supplemental documentation that's in here? Or is this just erroneous documentation?
Where are we looking? I'm sorry.
Page 18. There's a chart and table labeled 145 Power Street.
Oh, in the back. So what I've included at the back there, Mr. Sealand, is some supportive decisions on other Manitoba housing properties from 2020. So what you'll find is the decision in front of that, so 145 Powers, and then that page 18 following it shows you our valuation of the property, just to provide the background as to how that figure was arrived at.
That's all the questions I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Mitchell,
Sure, I could talk.
do you want me to come back?
Maybe, no,
Okay.
just leave it at
The photos that you've taken, when were those taken?
They were taken in July of this year.
So they're fairly recent. Are they all of one unit or?
No, we made it clear that we needed to see,
So there were
a
more than
perspective
one,
of the property.
more than one vacant, more than one vacant unit at the time of your inspection?
There must have been, yes.
And your cap rate on page 13. So what you've done is you've tried to establish a baseline for the apartments, and then you're saying there should be a premium on top of it for various reasons that you've explained. Did you attempt to do it for row housing or townhouses? Establish a baseline and then you could adjust from there?
Yes. So just to speak to that point quickly, there's a lot fewer row houses in the marketplace and a lot fewer row housing out there, or town housing. And so there's significantly less sales, very, very few sales, frankly, on the marketplace of these. So we were not able to determine, one, where we were able to get a reliable cap rate on it. I didn't bring the chart in with regard to all of the sales of all the apartments, but I don't recall there being one where we could determine a cap rate, and even if we had one, you can't rely on one sale. Generally speaking, townhouses, there was a time where they were being converted to condominiums. That legislation has since changed, and it's no longer as profitable to do so. So that is no longer really an option. So they do tend to trade when they do for higher cap rates than standard market apartments. So I couldn't really determine a baseline, unfortunately, based on the data.
And then your comment was that 1 and 2 bedrooms are more desirable in the marketplace. Does that hold true for row housing or town housing as well?
Well, for row and town housing, typically what's, I guess, the intent of them is to accommodate families. So they do tend to have greater number of bedrooms, so 3 bedrooms, sometimes 4 and 5, as we look at some of the other Manitoba housings here. On the open market, yes, there's families out there that need accommodating, but this type of housing is in less demand and does tend to have a greater vacancy and less demand out there. Therefore, there's less interest from investors. If you're going to have units that are vacant for longer, lower income, it impacts what you're willing to pay for them.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Nesbitt?
Yeah, you did indicate that MHRC has designated the property for demolition, or
They have considered
they've
demolition.
just considered it?
Yes. They hadn't made a decision when we were speaking to them about
So it's
this
not,
property.
okay, so I misunderstood then. It's not designated. It's just being considered.
It's being strongly considered for demolition and rebuilding, yes.
Okay, and why?
Because of the condition of the property.
Okay.
So what we're showing you there in the photos is indicative of what it's like.
Okay. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Just to follow that up, they were considering it in July when you made your inspection? Is that when you...
That's correct, yes.
You've had no further contact, see whether they're still considering it,
Well,
or whether they're moving forward, or...
Given the pace of our hearing schedule,
No, understand.
I haven't had the opportunity
Yeah,
to check in
understand.
on
So
all of them, so,
that's fine.
yeah.
Actually, can I,
Is it a follow-up question?
there's follow-up questions
Okay.
based on what it said, and then, like I said, this is going to be more in depth than the rest. Hopefully we can
Certainly.
go through the rest.
As long as it's a follow-up and not a
It
new
is.
question. Okay.
There was reference to these decisions at the back that you included of other properties. So the subject is, it's in the Maples, isn't it? It's called the Maples?
Not exactly, I wouldn't say. Well, it's West Kildonan, North Inkster. I don't know if Maples is a little further west, but it's in that area. We can all look at the map if you want.
Right.
Page number 9.
Well, at the very least it's West Kildonan.
Yes.
So the first one that you included is 100 Charles Law. I've always considered that to be the most difficult property that Manitoba Housing has. It's in Lord Selkirk Park.
I would agree with that.
Okay.
Okay, so that was a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
The second one, what about 7-Eleven Dufferin, is
So
that the same sort of area?
If we're going to talk about these, then let's talk about them. 100 Charles Walk, yes, I would agree, it's perhaps in the toughest area that they have. It's not slated for demolition or considered for demolition.
That wasn't the question I asked.
I
The
understand
question I
that.
asked is the location.
Yeah, the location I
And-
would consider to be the toughest area of Winnipeg,
Right,
yes.
and so the Manitoba, or I should say the city gives a premium to cap rates there, don't they?
They do, but it was not 6.5.
7-Eleven Dufferin, is that the same area?
It's very similar, yes.
What about 145 Powers? Is that Selkirk and Powers?
It's in that vicinity, yes.
And is that another city Winnipeg higher cap rate location?
It is a city of Winnipeg higher cap rate location, but what we're looking at is the decisions and how they were arrived at.
So what about 355 Charles? Is that?
Charles is also located in that north end area as well at 6.5. We do, so,
That was the question.
okay, and that's fine. I'll speak to this later on others, I guess.
That was your follow-up question?
Right.
Okay, and therefore, did you want to make a summation as well on this property, or do you want to reserve it till the end
I'll
of the
reserve
year?
a summation till the end.
Okay. Mr. Smith, did you want to do a summation on this, or do you want to reserve it?
No, I think I'll reserve it till the end as well.
Okay, thank you. This property we'll deal with then is number 2 Manor House Court. And we're going on the assumption that a lot of what was presented in the first property holds true for the remainder of the properties.
That's
It's
right.
basically
Okay,
right at the same spot.
that's fine. So we'll take a lot of them as asked and answered questions, but
Thank you.
if there's something specific, we can deal with that too. So when you're ready, Mr. Susser?
Okay, thanks. 2 Manor House Court is file number 19-1765, roll number 0500407680. This is, again, another Manitoba Housing owned property. We have, just like the previous one, 5 building, each being 4 units, built in 1971. We have a site plan, which it's basically 1 block over from the previous one. So I call it the Maples, it could be Westcott Owners. There's a picture of the street view of the site. Again, we agree on NOI, and our cap rate for 1971 property is 5.3%. I haven't been in this property ever, I don't think, and I didn't notice that there was any permits that would be relevant.
So is there a conclusion you've reached?
Oh, sorry, if you have any questions, or I'd like you to maintain the assessment of $1,810,000. If you have any questions, be happy to try and answer them.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, questions for the assessor?
Again, I'm assuming this is just model driven.
It is, and if you look at page 4 of our brief, when you compare it to privately owned our model lowers the quality of these Manitoba housing properties. So our rent is coming in lower than the privately owned properties. That's how we adjust them for quality. It's by lowering the quality. We have different quality levels. So they're either at below average or poor.
Okay. So page number 5, let's look at capitalization rates. City of Winnipeg has the chart that they typically provide. And as we go down, we can see the multifamily sector there. And you see that the city doesn't really do a breakdown between categories of properties, high-rise, low-rise, they're all the same. We have a broad range of 4% on the low end to 7.3% at the high end, and a tight range of 20th to 80th percentile, 4.9 to 5.3. And yet, when we look at the market participants, we're looking at ranges that indicate a broader, higher range, 5 to 6%. Low rises, 5.5 to 6, 5.75 to 6, 5 to 5.75%. What is it? Why would the city be so significantly different in their determination of capitalization rates between the main commercial real estate brokerages that do the trading in these properties in the marketplace? Why would the city's information be that dramatically different?
Ours is more in depth.
More in depth?
Right. So we have, at the top end of the range at 7.3 is for a very old building in a very tough area. And at the very low end of the cap range, 4% is a property that is newer in an average, possibly St. Boniface, and it's a small property that almost turns into a property that's residential. So the small 4-unit buildings are hard to do on the income approach because the cap rates are so low. Often they're owner occupied and that type of thing, and a lot of people in the marketplace can buy a 4-unit building in an area and rent it out and use it as a personal investment. When we questioned one of the brokers that was involved with the Collier's report, he gave really sketchy information. He said he didn't actually have buildings in certain categories. It was just his opinion. Our cap rates are developed by getting information from almost all the owners of properties in Winnipeg. So again, I say ours is very in-depth, and we have a broader range.
So, just to clarify then, you're suggesting that the premier brokers in the city, such as Mr. Don White at Collier's or Martin McGarry at Cushman Wakefield, C.D. Richard Ellis has a team that they bring in as well. You're suggesting that the knowledge base of the city is different, that you have more in-depth knowledge of.
You can go to the transcript of when Mr. Don White was questioned, and the type of property that we had at that hearing, he said he didn't have any cap rates of.
Would that be because there were no transactions?
I don't know why he said that, but that's what he said. And when I worked, well, my experience is that ours is more in depth.
Okay, those are all of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. ceiling?
Have you seen this property yourself?
Not inside.
No, not inside, okay. Have there been any renovations since this property, do you know?
I'm not if there was permits, they were so minor that I didn't include them. Like, we get permits for things like occupancy of certain types of uses, and there was nothing really that was applicable that would tell me the quality or the types of renovations. There was nothing major that I could see. Otherwise, I would have included it.
That's all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt?
I do have a question. Just looking at this property and the one previous, they're the same age, they're the same suite mix, same number of suites, relatively the same area, but they have different expenses, expense ratio. You've assigned the same rent, so that's not a problem. The rents are different, the model rents are different. Can you explain that to me? It just strikes me as, I'm looking at the pictures, they're the same type of
Right.
property.
One's got a lower quality. So the one, this one, at Two Manor House has been given a lower quality than the previous one.
So the previous one was poor quality.
I don't know what quality either is at, but for a higher expense ratio, that's telling me that for identical buildings, it's telling me that the quality is lower. So when the quality, as I said, that the highest any Manitoba housing would be is average.
Right. Okay.
And we've lowered most of them to either below average or poor. So I'm only guessing, because I don't have the model in front of me, that one is below average and one is poor.
Okay.
It's normal that they're all at below average, and the ones that are chronically coming to the board usually were put at poor. If we kept getting cuts. If you know, the properties are standing up and the assessments are being maintained, then we don't change them. So it's probably the case. And after each hearing, I put these, I make little notes on them, and some of the quality's increased and some it's lowered. So we're trying to hit where the assessment should be. But we have also a lot of properties.
No, I do appreciate that you do. Yeah. Yeah. And
every effort's being made.
right. So in order to change that quality from below average to poor, does that require inspection? Or is that a practice? Maybe is the better question.
It's a judgment by the assessor that's involved. Mm-hmm. And it's a flick of a button. It's not a major thing.
Okay.
If an inspection's, in some cases we do inspect the properties, so I shouldn't say that, but where there's, you know, a lot of pictures or information of a lot of maintenance, like thousands and thousands of dollars per unit, then we'll want to have a look at it, see what it looks like now.
All right.
And if there's pictures of poor units, then we might want to have a look.
Okay.
So.
Does your notes indicate when the last time this property was inspected?
No.
Okay, thank you, that's all.
Thank you. Does your model have a category separate for condition as well as quality?
Sort of the same thing.
It is the same, so that it would be the same adjustment?
Yeah, it's box that comes up, and we can change all the way from excellent down to poor. So obviously newer, high-quality buildings are at above average to excellent. These ones are lower.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith? Please move, please.
Okay, 2 Manor House Court. As indicated, it's located in exactly the same area. We have again 23-bedroom units built in 1971, also owned by Manitoba Housing. This property is in what I would call, I guess, original condition. There has not been any significant change to it over that time. If you look at the photographs of it, you can see the original tile flooring, original cabinetry, where floors have been damaged beyond reasonable repair. You may see that there's the newer Manitoba Housing finish in the one particular bedroom, and then with some damage to it with the original tile flooring showing underneath that. So the property would be in below average condition, not and in as poor condition as the property that we were just looking at. So in terms of valuation, we are in agreement coming down to the net operating income. I won't go through the points here. We do arrive at the same net operating income. Subject property is in better condition than the prior property, so we've reduced our capitalization rate to 6.25%. Now, again, we're looking at townhouse properties. We're looking at 3-bedroom units. We're looking at below average condition, and all of the other value impacts upon value that I've gone through at length here, so I'm not going to go through those again. 6.25% is an appropriate cap rate for this. Again, it's not a standard investment property, and it is going to have a premium. So at 6.25%, this gives us $1,535,000 as our final value. The addenda materials that have been included, I did not specifically select these ones to be indicative of only the north end. We have roughly 130 of these Manitoba Housing properties that we've done. The results come in and get entered into our spreadsheet, and we have a number of them that are at 6, 6.25, 6.5. The ones that have been included here, I see that are from the north end, but there are others outside of the north end that also indicate that level. So that's my commentary with regard to the ones that are included in the addenda of the brief. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Lucky?
No questions.
Mr. Seeland?
Just for clarification, this is Bristolville then, not the north end?
Not the north end, no. The map is shown on page number 9, so it is in that Maples, Garden City area, yeah.
So my question.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt?
No questions.
Just a more follow-up comment, I guess, Mr. Smith. You said you do have decisions for 6 and 6.25, 6.5 for other areas of the city. Mm-hmm. It may be more appropriate to include those in further documentation if it's not North End properties. However, having said that, the previous decisions by boards may aid us somewhat, but we can't place total reliance on them. We don't know what was presented, what was heard at that property, but it gives us a guideline. I understand that. But that's my comment. Thank you. At this point, do we need a short break, or, yes, let's take a 10-minute break then, please, and then we'll resume. I'm assuming that we've covered a lot of the grounds, and the next ones may go quicker.
Yes. I think we moved faster on this one, didn't we? I hope.
Yes.
Yeah.
we did.
Okay, so we'll take a 10-minute break then, please. I'll call the recess. Okay, I'll call the meeting back to order. Next property we'll deal with is 653 Dufferin. So when you're ready, Mr. Assessor, please.
Thank you. 653 Dufferin Avenue. Is file number 19-1975, roll number 1400238750. And here we have co-op, cooperative housing, which is, I call it a sponsored group for rental housing. But co-ops have stated rent. It may or may not be market that they have rent. It's not geared to a percentage rent. If somebody can't afford the rent, they may or may not be subsidized to pay the rent that's on the suite. Anyway, this is 3 buildings, 2 stories built in 1993. There's 10 units. And then I have some pictures. This is on Dufferin between McGregor and Mackenzie, which is just 2 blocks south of Selkirk Avenue. Tried to get the best pictures I could. 2B is a street view picture, and then 2C is our old pictures that were taken before all the trees grew up, so you can actually see the building. It would have been fairly new at 2C picture. Anyway, it's still, it's a 1993 building, so it's fairly new in comparison to rental properties in Winnipeg. We have 5 2-bedrooms and 5 4-bedrooms. And we have model parameters which we pretty much agree on. There's a slight difference in NOI, but not very much. Our cap rate for this building is 5.4. So that would be including North End premium. Otherwise, it would be under 5. And this building, being that it's 1993, the 51.68% would tell me that we've hit the quality fairly hard, so it would be at least below average to poor, somewhere in that range. I would I just wanted to point something out here. My page 11, which is it's the return from the group. It shows that there's 1 1-bedroom, 6 2-bedrooms, 20 22 3-bedrooms and 14 4-bedrooms. So this group obviously runs other housing, calls it scattered housing. So it'll be often one project and then either single family or duplexes scattered around the general area. So their projects don't line up with our roll numbers, and that's part of the difficulty with the Manitoba housing returns. They often don't align with our roll, so that makes them difficult to use with any accuracy. So this, like I said, I just wanted to point out it's an obvious example where the returns don't line up. I'm not asking for non-compliance because they made an effort to do a return. But anyway, we pretty much agree on NOI, but that's one of the difficulties when looking at the returns. And I would ask that you maintain the assessment of $1,007,000, which is about $100,000 per unit. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, questions for the assessor?
I have no questions.
Mr. Seaman?
Have you inspected this property yourself?
No, I haven't done any recent inspections of any of them. I've been in a few of them in the past.
Yeah. Have you did this one in the past?
No.
You haven't, okay. Any recent locations or permits and changes?
Nope. I would say this is a pretty modern building, and I didn't see any major permits.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt?
And this is all model.
Right.
And so your cap rate, you said, reflects a North End premium.
North End premium.
What is the premium? How many points is that?
I think it's 0.5%. I can tell you in a second here. It's 0.7%.
So 0.7, so then this cap rate would be 4.7? That's the base cap rate?
Just give me a second. I'll look at it. First floor area is 10,000. And this is 93. That's right, it's 0.7%. It would have been, in a different area, it'd be 4.7. Okay. Here it's 5.4.
And that 4.7 does reflect the size. That's one of the reasons.
It's 10,000 square feet, which is kind of the middle of our, where we do size adjustments. We go up to 8,000 and 8,000, 15,000 and 15,000 and up.
Okay, thank you.
You say that your NOIs are fairly close, and I guess the reason for that is the vacancy. You're applying a 2.4% vacancy versus the 3%.
I think so.
And why is that? Is vacancy not is that a matter of location? Or does the age come into consideration when you're doing vacancy? I don't think any of the published reports stratify by age, do they, when they're reporting vacancy?
I think CMHC does. There's different categories, but I don't think that our no, age doesn't affect vacancy for us, it's location. We have different vacancy rates for the different locations in different neighborhoods.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Smith, can you please?
Okay, just to start with, this is not a Manitoba housing property. Has no association with them. It's a cooperative housing group, entirely separate from Manitoba Housing. They do have, as indicated, they have a number of properties, and I guess given their accounting, they were probably they were unable to, I suppose, separate that in what was submitted to the city. If you look at in the addenda in my brief or the back of the city's brief, you can see the submission, and it obviously lists higher revenues and greater expenses, etc., than you would generate for a property of this size. So it is taking into account units that are located elsewhere, and we will obviously give them direction that if at all possible, they need to break those out so that the city can accurately reflect that in their future assessment cycles. So looking at the subject property itself, we're looking at 5 2-bedroom units and 5 4-bedroom units for the subject property. Yes, it was built in 1993, again, as social housing. It's built where the need is and where the land is available. So the need was here. They built it in this location. But I'm just going to get you to flip to my page number 11. It is located in that Lord Selkirk Park, William White area, as already indicated earlier in the hearing. This is essentially the most economically disadvantaged, socially disadvantaged area of the city. Sometimes location has a much larger impact on value than in some other locations, and certainly in this area of town that is the case. What I've done in some other briefs, and I see that it wasn't included here, is include some socioeconomic stats with regard to income levels, transfer payment levels, levels of unemployment, etc. And what it shows for this area is obviously dramatically lower income, dramatically higher unemployment, greater government transfers, etc. So that's the background of the area that the property is located within. That has an impact in value in that obviously rents are going to be on the lower side. Generally, you're going to have properties that are not perhaps treated as well, and you get more wear and tear, etc. There's less incentive to reinvest in the properties, so deferred maintenance becomes an issue, etc. It's all a cycle, and it has an overall impact on value. So your rents are going to be low, and your cap rates are going to be high. Subject property photos are shown beginning on page 4. It would generally be in slightly below average condition. You can see the again, basic nature of the furnishings. tile flooring, etc. If you look at the top of page 6, there was a brick or whatever put through the window from the outside there that they're in the process of repairing for that particular unit. You can see the basic level of the flooring, kitchens, etc. We visited a couple of units here. It appeared that they were accommodating a lot of recent immigrants to Canada in a number of these units. So moving forward on the valuation side, given that there's no reliable income and expense to break out for the subject property, what we did is look at the city's valuation and the market and determine whether that appeared to be fair valuation on the income side or not. So with 5 2-bedrooms and 5 4-bedrooms here, the overall average of $961 appeared to be in line with what we felt would be appropriate on the market. If you look at vacancy rates, again, we're looking at that Lord Selkirk area. So if you look at the top of my page 13 in the vacancy chart there, there's no, or sorry, that's rent. If we look at the bottom of page number 13, then the Lord Selkirk area, the overall average is 3.1. 2-bedrooms are at 3.8. There's no real registration for 3+ bedrooms because there's so few of them. So the market evidence is pointing to higher vacancy. That's why we use 3%, which is in keeping with many of the others here today. The capitalization rate, this area is going to be significantly impacted on the cap rate side. Property, yeah, it was built in '93. You have non-standard 4-bedroom units. It's not an area that investors tend to like to invest in, and when they do, the cap rates are significantly higher. So taking all of our comments from before, looking at 6 as certainly a baseline, absolutely you would have a significant premium to that. And we are at 6.5%. Capitalizing the NOI at 6.5 gives us our final market value of $832,000. And in keeping with that, the decisions that we're not relying upon but are present in the addenda from the same area are giving you indications that 6.5 is being accepted as a cap rate for that vicinity. And I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lucky, questions for the applicant?
And their return,
It's in the addenda section of Mr. Smith's presentation.
oh, your return's different from mine. Is it a different year?
Let me find it. So ours is, as of year end, March 31st, 2018, so right at the reference date. Their year end is March 31st, so that may be why you had the other one.
Oh, I see. Okay, because ours, it says there's no vacancy. Yours just has a slash on vacancy.
Vacancy for that particular year, they're not indicating any of their bad debt expense, which is ultimately the same thing is shown on the year before. They have a unit vacant that they have to do significant repair to at the moment. Again, we're not looking at point in time, it's an overall vacancy that the property would experience in a normal situation, so.
And then on your return, it says rents geared to income.
Correct. It's a social housing entity, nonprofit.
Well, if there's no vacancy, except for this one that they're fixing up, wouldn't it suggest that there's good demand?
So we're looking, again, we're looking at a single point in time, and in looking at that, what we need to do in coming up with these valuations is look at the normal operation of a property such as this. So you have 10 units, any vacancy that you have is going to have a fairly significant impact overall on a property. So to say that it had no particular vacancy in a single year is not that it shouldn't have a vacancy rate applied to it. Standard modeling practice and valuation practice is that you need to account for vacancy. All I'm applying is the normal market vacancy. We're not asking for anything above or below that.
Right, but I guess the issue I'm getting at is that there is demand for four-bedroom units.
They're a nonprofit entity operating on a rent geared to income basis and providing that service. So that is their structure.
I guess what I'm trying to say is there demand or not? It says there's no vacancy. It's a yes or no.
So I would suggest that there would be less demand for four-bedroom units overall in the marketplace. That would be my answer.
In your opinion.
No, it's not an opinion. It's
Okay, can we move on
We
from
can't
that
point to
question,
stats
please? You've
because
asked it, you've answered it.
Nobody tracks it because there's so few of them. Otherwise, I could point to stats. It's not an opinion.
Okay.
Nothing further, Mr. Lucky? Mr. Sealand?
Page 3, it says 1972 vintage. Is it 1993 or is it 1972?
Oh, yes.
Or did I misunderstand?
I'm not sure if we included the market attributes for the subject property at the back. I don't think I see it.
I think page 3,
I'm not
Mr.
sure.
Smith, I think it's just a typo, 1972.
It's probably a typo, yes. Yeah, I apologize for that.
Issue. That's my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt?
Yeah, so in looking at these returns, there is a lot of differences between the 2018 and the 2017. I'm assuming it's 2018, it doesn't have the year written down. One of the things it does say was MHRC subsidy on the return attached to your submission, Mr. Smith.
Yes, indeed it does. So they have two different subsidies. There's, both of them from MHRC. So yes, this is certainly the norm with many nonprofits is that they do receive subsidies either from CMHC or Manitoba Housing or other organizations in order to allow them to operate at a break-even point. And I think I state that in my brief early on, that their intent is to operate on a break-even level. And when you provide the housing on a rent-geared income basis, they're not going to break even, so they have to receive subsidies. So if you look at their year-end deficiency of revenue over expenses, we have them making $13,000 in 2018, losing $112,000 in 2017, and so forth. So the subsidy is to let them operate at a break-even level.
Then what's the relationship,
No.
just strictly
It's simply
to
a funding,
owners? It's just
simply a
funding?
funding relationship. There's no ownership or overseeing involved by Manitoba Housing. They do not own it, they don't have, it's simply a funding mechanism like any other nonprofit in the city.
So then, if that's the case, some of the risks you cited before for properties were associated with MHRC type housing. Do the same risks exist for this type of
It does,
property?
yes. Yeah, in that they have the same mandate and the same situation with regard to tenancies and agreements, et cetera. With tenants having the exact same rights as any other tenant in the city under residential tenancies branch and
That's not
governing
unique to this
legislation.
type of housing though, is it? Or is it just,
It's not
this
unique.
is a co-op, right?
It's not
So-
unique to it, but it affects it more in that when the argument from the city is that, well, you can kick them all out and raise the rents, well, you can't. That's the point. They have the legal right to remain in place.
Do the tenants in this property as a co-op, like who, do they have a stake in the ownership?
No. They would have stake in the ownership in that they would have to have a single ownership share, yes. That's generally the operation of co-ops, is that they have to, it's not a buy-in essentially, but you have to own a share in the co-op in order to become a member and an occupant. So there's no profit out of that. It's simply an in and out. Once you leave, you get your co-op share money back.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So the subsidy is after the fact? At the end of their operating year, they fall short $500,000 and HRC grants them $500,000, or if it's $250,000, they grant them $250,000?
I honestly couldn't tell you when that is done, whether it's twice a year or quarterly or at the end, and if they receive.
But it's meant to be to balance out. It's not something where they'll go give it to them in anticipation that $250,000 will cover their shortfall for the year.
I very much doubt that they would receive it in advance. It would be after the fact, I would suggest, in order to make up for shortfall for whatever percentage that they're allowed, et cetera.
Right. Okay, and then probably the reason for the different numbers on the subsidy is because this is an aggregate of other properties that they have as well.
That's correct.
And just curiosity, more than anything else, page 10. What is that circular thing in the middle of the, do you know?
If I have an answer for you.
Is that just like a play structure or something there, or it's not a building?
It's not a building. Oh, it is a play structure, you're right.
Is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on then to 116 Lydia. Are you ready, Mr. Assessor?
Uh, 116 Lydia is file number 19-1763, roll number 130-614-98000. It's Manitoba housing property. There's two buildings, two-story townhouses built in 1977, and there's 10 units. This is on 2A is a site plan, and we're talking about one block east of the Health Sciences Center. It's the tract on the other side, I believe, is school. There's a picture of the one of the buildings on 2B. And we have the same NOI, and our cap rate for this building is 4.4, which we differ. And I would ask that you maintain the assessment of $719,000. On my page 9, there's a decision from the last go around with Altus that was reduced from $636,000 to $599,000. That's all I would have.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, questions?
Yes, just looking at that decision that you included there, so I see that the 6.5% cap rate was used in the decision. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Those are my only questions.
Thank you. Mr. Sealand?
Any limitations to this property at all? You know?
No, I don't know already.
Does this have a basement?
I don't know. It looks like there could be basement windows, but I honestly don't know. I don't know, be guessing.
Have you inspected this property?
No, I'm not familiar with this property. Actually, it says basement area is 0 on the previous one.
So my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Lincoln?
And I have any questions?
The cap rate that would be determined, this would fall in your premium added for the side, is that correct? I think the gross floor area is 7480.
Exactly. That would be our lowest. Smallest.
And there's no recognition for the area. Lydia is not in your
Right.
area that receives the
No.
upward adjustment. Thank you. Mr. Smith, hear from you, please.
All right. So 116 Lydia Street, subject property built in 1977. These are all 2-bedroom townhome units. There are 10 of them. And again, it's a Manitoba Housing owned and operated facility, operated on rent geared to income basis, as they all are. There are photographs of the property beginning on page 4 and going forward. It is dominantly in original condition. They have had some changes where needed to countertops, etc., as you can see, but as you can also see, the flooring remains in place, the bathroom is original, etc. So the property has not gone through a renovation. Site is shown on page 8, and the location, as already indicated, is shown on page 9 by the aerial. It is in that kind of Centennial, West Alexander area, closer to Notre Dame, and Health Sciences Center, I guess, is also there. With regard to the net operating income, again, operated on rent geared to income, so we can't rely on the income. We did look at the rents applied of $610. We do feel that would be market level for this property. On the vacancy side, we have applied 3% in keeping with the market stats as shown on page 11. The actual expenses are shown on page number 12. We did showed you 3 years of history and a stabilization for 2018. Came out to just under $45,000 as well, $44,669 on page number 12. That would produce a relatively high expense allowance, and we felt to arrive at a fair market value, it would be too high, so we did not apply the actuals or the stabilized. So we deferred in this case again to the city's expense allowance, but it does show you that the expenses do tend to be higher. And we come down to the same net operating income. Now, the subject property is a more standard 2-bedroom development, more demand in the marketplace for 2-bedroom units. It is located in the Centennial, West Alexander, but it is in relatively close proximity to Health Sciences Center there. So we do recognize that. There's a smaller number of units in the property at 10, so looking at that side, those are obviously positives. On the balance, again, you have pretty basic accommodation here, and condition does tend to be average to below average for the property. So what would this cap out at? Well, if you look at our chart with regard to cap rates, if you look at the main market participants, your range is in that 5 to 6% range overall, 5.5 to 6 for low rises. There's no specific townhomes. Given the size of the property at 10 units, we have taken that into account, and we've used a 5.5% cap rate. Now, if you line that up with the main market participants, you're kind of either at the low end or in the middle end of the range with regard to what they see as being appropriate for investment-grade properties in the marketplace. So we've recognized the fact that it is on the smaller side and there would be more investors for it. So this gives us our final market value of $575,000. And I would also point out that the decision from the last cycle was at a 6.5% cap rate. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lucky?
I have no questions.
Mr. Sealand?
I have no questions.
Ms. Nesbitt? Just a comment. Talking about the last board decision being at 6.5%, but the value is higher than what this one is, so obviously the NOI would have been higher.
The NOI would have been different, certainly, but I'm pointing out that was the decision taken with regards to capitalization rate.
Thank you. 352 Pacific, we'll deal with next.
Um, 352 Pacific is file number 19-4286, roll number 130-715-48500. We have an example of, I would say, scattered housing. A lot of these are single family, some are attached, some aren't. We have years built 77 to 78. Page 2A, this site plan. This would be one block, like Pacific, it's on Pacific at Ellen. If you go one block over, you're at Salter at the Freight House Community Center. Or if you go a couple blocks east, you're at the, right here. You run into us roughly. Page 2B is, and 2C and D is some pictures. As you can see, they're side by side, single family, sort of mixture finishing. Well, I'd only be guessing. So anyway, we agree on the NOI, and cap rate is where we differ. So our cap rate for this is 5. I would ask that you maintain the assessment of $4,394,000. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
I have no questions.
Mr. Seelan?
Just a quick question. Do these not have basements? I see the basement already. Do they not have basements in them?
A lot of them do. I've been in some of them, and they have basements. I haven't been in all of them, but it's supposed. Well, it's like a little neighborhood. It's houses side by sides. There's some little clusters of multifamily. It's loosely tied in with there's a project, it's a high-rise, used to be seniors, right at Salter and Pacific. And then immediately north of here, there's a whole bunch of single-family and side-by-sides. That whole general area is social housing. This is one portion of it. When I did work for housing, I was involved with this. I was in several of the other projects. And it's about the closest thing to a little neighborhood. I don't know if the houses were older houses that were put on newer foundations or what. I can't answer that. But I'm somewhat familiar with the place.
Were there any renovations of these two locations?
Well, the other roll immediately west was completely redeveloped. This one, I don't believe, has had any major renovations. When I looked at our information, there was no major permits. But,
I think you said you have
I haven't been in it recently. It would be like 15, 20 years ago. So I'm actually older than I was.
I'll leave it there, Mr.
We'll leave it at that.
Better than yours.
No further questions.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt?
Okay, can you just give me an explanation on how this, a little bit more? I see there's a residential 10G component, so smaller buildings, maybe 1-2 units, I'm thinking?
The 10 is 4 units or less.
Yes.
So the 20 is more than 4 units.
Right, so there's what, 8 plexes, 6, like I just, do you know? It's okay if you don't, I'm sure.
I'm trying to remember because, like I said, all these projects are, there's a whole bunch of them together and they're all,
Right.
okay, if you look at the site plan on 2A,
Okay. Okay.
the pictures are along Pacific of those single families, but there's also along Ellen and at the corner of Ellen and I think it's Ross. Those are more than 4 units.
Okay.
So it's a hodgepodge of houses and side-by-sides and multifamily.
Okay, and it's all one big entity.
One
under
big
your
roll.
rule.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it may or may not include some of the side-by-sides and infill houses immediately north of this. I don't know, to tell you the truth.
Okay. And you've used the same model parameters regardless of the type of structure it is?
Right. As it's all on one roll, we look at it as though it's a typical multifamily building. Obviously, it's not. It's a cluster of various things. We agree that it should be done on the income, but unless ownership changes, that would be the way that we would do it.
Okay, and that cap rate then, regardless of the type of structure? You use the same?
It's a hybrid for sure. Like I said, all these single family and side-by-sides would be done with comparable house sales.
Yeah.
I forget what that's called, and we do it that way. But because they're all on this roll together, we do the whole works on the income.
Okay. Yeah, it's a different sort of thing.
Not everything fits into our pigeonhole.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So, on page 2A, you've done your Donald Trump outline here. So,
I'm not sure what that means.
with the black felt pen.
Oh, okay.
So that's meant to be the roll number,
Yes.
but your comment was it may include some of the
It may or
infill to
may
the
not.
north.
So, we're not relying on the income and expense statement. But this.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's your income and expense that.
Yeah, that's right.
Not the actual properties included in the roll number.
No.
Oh, that's
No,
not,
we're,
yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay.
Got it.
sorry, I didn't make that clear.
Yeah.
All the buildings in this black felt rectangle
Right,
are valued,
right, as this roll number.
yes.
Got it.
Yes.
For this statement, it may or may not include,
Okay. That
as
clears
we
that
saw
up.
with the other one, the co-op that included other. These scattered housing, like I said, often doesn't line up with our roll numbers. So if there is single-family and duplexes outside these lots, they're done differently, and they're assessed on their
Right,
own.
right. And just a clarification, basements are not considered to be leasable area anyway, are they?
We try not to include them in the area. In some cases where you have the
At the bottom
apartments
level or-
that are, yeah, there
or
is
2.5
basement suites, obviously we include that.
Right.
Even though, like, some of that is mechanical, but obviously we count the suites that are in the basement and occupied. I don't think that they have basement suites here. Although people could sleep down there.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith, clear from you, please.
Okay, so 352 Pacific, as already stated, it is a mixture of housing types and sizes. We have between 1 and 4 bedrooms here, the predominance of them being larger. We have 23 bedrooms, 9 4-bedrooms in that mix, so 29 out of 50. And a variety of side-by-sides, a few individual houses and some larger complexes. So it is a unique animal, I certainly grant that. The property was built in 1977. It has not, and we obviously have not been through each of these individual units, but there's been no overall upgrade to the property since that time. They will obviously invest in renovations or repairs rather when needed. So you'll get individual floors or things that are replaced when they're broken, etc. But it has not gone through the refresh program that Manitoba Housing occasionally does on entire projects, and you can see this from the photos that are shown there. There are basements in some of the units, not all of them, but they're just bare bones. They're not built out by housing in any standard. It's a cement floor, cement walls with teleposts. That's where you're looking at, and that's where your furnace, etc. would be. So. Moving on to the valuation itself, we did look at obviously the income and expense. We are in agreement for the overall property. What I would point out in addition with regard to the subject is that you're looking at a vast number of individual buildings here, again, as with most townhomes or all townhomes. They're all going to have their own systems. They're all going to have their own hot water tanks, furnaces, dryers, which are supplied by housing, individual roofs, etc. There's a lot of infrastructure to maintain here for these properties. As an investor, if you buy an apartment block, you're buying a property typically with a boiler or a heating system that's a single system that services the whole building with a single roof, etc. Here, it's a mishmash of many buildings that, again, has not had significant renovations since '77. So that would have an impact on your vision of the appropriate value for that property, and would drive a higher cap rate. So looking at the mix of units, looking at that aspect of the property, obviously all of the other things we've already talked about, we've assigned a cap rate of 6.5% to the subject property, and that gives us our market value of $3,380,000. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Mr. Lucky, questions for the applicant?
No questions.
Thank you. Mr. Seaman?
Sure, you gave us a breakdown. What was the breakdown on
Of the units themselves?
Yes.
We have 3 one-bedrooms, 18 two-beds, 20 three-beds, and 9 four-beds.
I believe you stated there's no preparations done for this property at all since,
Not as a specific project where they're going through and renovating. They will do repair where needed, where if flooring is damaged beyond repair, they'll replace it, those types of things.
thank you, Mr. Chair, that's all my questions.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt?
No, I have no questions. Oh, I do actually. So your evaluation, in your page, whatever it is, doesn't make a breakdown between the residential class 10, class 20? Are you just accepting, I know it makes no difference to taxation, but are you just accepting the assessor's 52%, 48% breakdown? Or have you, or are you even considering it? Doesn't matter to you?
It really doesn't matter, so.
You're just looking for that overall number?
It's the overall value of the property, yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And I have no questions. Thank you. Next, we'll deal with 160 Kate. Readiness for assessment.
160 Kate is roll number 19-1752, file number I should say, and roll number 130702, 53000. We have another Manitoba housing property. This was it's one building built in 1987. There's 5 suites. At 2A, there's a site plan, and I have the site circled. We're west of Isabel would be at the top, that long strip. I don't know if I put it up each. That's the Field House Community Center. So we would be between Isabel and the Health Sciences Center, several blocks to the west. 2B, I have a current picture. 2C is an older picture. And again, we have the same NOI and differ for cap rate. Ours is 4.4, and that's based on this being a very small property of just under 5,000 square feet total area. So that's our lowest rate for properties built between 1975 and 1997. This being at 1987. And I would ask that you maintain the assessment of $448,000, which is approximately $97,000 per unit.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, questions for the assessor?
I have no questions.
Thank you. Mr. Seeland?
This property is located close to the Freight House, is it? Freight House?
If you look at the site plan 2A, did I put a FH on here?
Yeah, the Freight House.
Freight House, right.
Yes,
Yeah.
And this property, you haven't inspected, as you mentioned?
No.
Okay. Have you inspected this property?
I've never been in this property, no.
That's my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt?
I have no question.
I have no questions. Mr. Smith? Please.
Okay, 160 Kate Street, again, Manitoba Housing property. It is 5 three-bedroom townhome units, built in 1987 with no changes to the property since that time. Subject property is in poor condition. As you can see from the photos that we show starting on page number 4, so it's not in below average condition, it would be in poor condition. So have a look at the photos there for you. You can see obviously the original nature of it, but more so the damage and just general overall condition of the interiors of the units. This does have an impact on value, obviously, and does need to be taken into account in coming up with that market value, and really there is no mechanism for that, understandably, in the city's modeling to have an impact on the capitalization rate in that fashion. Looking at the actual valuation itself, we were in agreement overall on the net operating income based on market stats, higher expense allowance, obviously, as you can see there, and we come down to the same net operating income of $21,297. Now, we recognize we have a smaller property here at 5 units. They are again townhome units, 3 bedrooms. The location of them, it's interesting. It's it's not we're not in the north end here, but we're also in that west of Isabel corridor, in that same vicinity, West Alexander, kind of near the Freight House. So there are obvious socioeconomic issues present in this area as well that do have an impact on value in terms of rental value and investor sentiment and what they'd be willing to pay in these marketplaces. Now, of course, on the other side, we have a total of 5 units, so there are more purchasers for properties of this size out there, and we do recognize that fact as well. So, property is in the condition as shown, poor condition. We've attributed a cap rate of 5.75% to the subject property based on this, and this gives us the market value of $370,000. And I'm open for questions.
Thank you. Mr. Lucky, questions for the applicants?
No question.
Thank you. Mr. Seeland?
Have you inspected this property recently?
We inspected this property. This was not one that I had the opportunity to visit myself, but we did inspect it as a company this summer in the process of doing all of these properties.
That's all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt?
So these pictures then were taken this summer
That's correct.
through the course of your inspection? That's all.
All questions have been asked and answered, so I have nothing further. Thank you. bring us to the last property on the docket today, which is 610. When you're ready, Mr. Assessor, use your evidence, please.
Thank you. Yeah, file number 19-1780, roll number 14081576200. We have Tunnels property located on Panet Road in Transcona. This is the West Transcona. And this property was built in 1972. There's 18 suites. Um, 2A, I have a site plan. Not sure what that SC is, maybe school across the street.
It's a shopping center.
Shopping center. There we go. Oh, I'm thinking it's not well, it's near the crossroads. Okay. I was thinking of kind of the road to a different street. Okay, now we know where we are. I think that used to be the Safeway at the crossroads, roughly. And 2B we have, a current street view picture, and 2C is an old picture showing. 2B would be more accurate, but hard to see because of the trees. We have 13 3-bedrooms, 5 4-bedrooms, and we agree on income and differ on vacancy and cap rate. I should point out that the condition has been taken into account with the 53.48 is a low rating for the building. So it would either be below average or poor. And that's all I have to say on that. I would ask that you maintain the assessment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, questions for the assessment?
I have no questions.
Mr. Seelan, questions?
Yes, I've noted that there's basement area square footage here. Is there actually finished basements in here? Or is it just basements?
If there's basements, they wouldn't be finished. So you're right, we have basement areas, but they would be unfinished.
Unfinished?
Unless a tenant were to finish.
That's all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbit?
I have no questions.
2.6 vacancy, where does that come from?
That's our model.
This model, so that's based on the neighborhood or the...
Based on the returns that we get from owners and CMHC.
For that particular location, though.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, can you hear from you, please?
Okay, 600 Planet Road, again, Manitoba Housing, developed property owned by them and operated by them, built in 1972. 18 townhome units, 13 of them being 3-bedroom and 5 of them being 4-bedroom. I haven't discussed this a lot today. Obviously 3 and 3+ bedrooms, so 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom units are less in demand on the marketplace. It's a non-standard type of unit. Typically investors are looking at 1 and 2 bedrooms as the dominant unit types out there that they seek in the marketplace. So as you move up in number of bedrooms, there is lower demand for them both in the marketplace and from investors themselves, as it's a less reliable income source in terms of having them occupied all of the time. Subject property is certainly in poor condition, as you can see from the photos beginning on page number 4. It has not been renovated in any fashion. You can see the interiors here. This is not a single unit. There are basements. They are not obviously developed. Until housing doesn't develop their basements, it's just cement flooring and teleposts. That's all it is. The original condition of everything is there for you to see, as well as the overall condition of the property. So it's certainly in poor condition. Now, the site area, or the site, is actually shown on page number 10. So yes, it is located on Panet Road there in behind the shopping center on the other side of Panet. And the overall aerial giving you the location is shown on page number 11 there. So you're a number of blocks north of Nairn and on the west side of Panet Road. Moving on to valuation itself, I'm going to go through this here, looking at subject property. We are in agreement with the overall rent, given the size of the units, the bedroom mix, location. Condition is obviously a factor, and it might derive less income than this on the marketplace, but overall we were in agreement with the rental rate in keeping with the overall valuation. We look at the vacancy issue for this particular location. Now, keep in mind, there's no real stats for 3 and or 4-bedroom units. If we look at apartment vacancy rates at the bottom of my page 13 from CMHC, and you look at the Transcona area, as you go down in unit size, they have 1 bedrooms shown there at 6.9%, 2 bedrooms at 6.5%, and 3 and 3+ bedrooms they have no particular stats on in that marketplace, I guess, given the lack of the number of those properties and data that they would have. There's no reliable stats. So clearly there's an indication that vacancy in Transcona is a bit higher. That's why we've assigned a higher vacancy rate of 6%. There's no particular stats on this building with regard to vacancy, but given the higher number of bedroom units in the building, I don't think that would be certainly out of line with the marketplace in that area. With regard to expenses, I've given you a 3-year history of the property on my page number 14. Expenses are obviously higher than what are projected for the property. varying between 109,000 and 211,000. We have stabilized them at $163,000+ for the valuation time frame. If we were to use that, it would be well over 60% of the effective gross income. We felt that this would produce an inaccurately low market value, so we did not go with the in-place or stabilized expenses for the subject. So we deferred to the city's expense ratio in this instance. Now, looking at subject property, obviously it's in the condition that it is in. It is original to 1972. Poor condition. You have the higher suite mix of 3 and 4 bedrooms. Balancing this, it would be in certainly a better area than some of the other properties that we've looked at today. And in fact, I'm going to make a downward adjustment to my cap rate here, and I'm going to use a 6.5% cap rate rather than 6 3/4. I was originally looking dominantly at condition of the property. I think if we take the location slightly more into account, we might derive a slightly lower cap on the marketplace despite the condition. So I'm using a 6.5%, and that will give us a market value of $1,685,000 for the subject property. And I'm happy to answer questions.
I thank you. Mr. Lucky?
I don't have any questions on this.
Mr. Seeland?
I'm sorry, so you adjusted the cap based on location?
Well, yes, it's in very poor condition, but it's not located in Lord Selkirk or West Alexander or the West End, etc. So, despite the condition and the unit mix, it's probably a little high on what I assigned to it.
Thank you, that was my question, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt?
I have no questions.
Just one. Your vacancy, you're considering taking into consideration the Transcona. If you look at the chart on page 13, and you look at the location on page 11,
Yeah.
would you maybe not temper that with an East Kildonan statistic as well? It's not a true Transcona, I don't think, but it's like if you look at the east, it's right in East Elmwood.
You could
neighborhood.
certainly. You could consider it that as well. I mean, it's kind of on the border.
Right.
I'm also taking into account the unit mix, but if certainly I could understand looking at the East Kildonan stats as well.
Okay, so it may be more
It might be
appropriate to be a little higher than the 2.6, but lower than the...
That could be, yes. Again, there's no reliable stats on 3 and 4 bedrooms out there.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lucky, summation for all the properties we've dealt with today.
Thank you. It became apparent that some of these are difficult to assess and value. But, I think we've done a good job. When you look at these properties, the assessment department has lowered the quality to reflect that they're, I wouldn't say inferior, but they're modestly built, top tile flooring and whatnot. So we're at below average and poor. And when you look at our comparable rentals that I've used, those are, for the most part, privately owned townhouses. And you'll see people like Ladco building 3 and 4 bedroom townhouse units. They obviously felt that there was a need for them, and I've had them under appeal, and I haven't seen where there's any problems with vacancy on privately owned townhouses. There hasn't been any sales that I've seen, so there's nothing to suggest that these properties are better or worse than typical apartment buildings. There's demand. The one I&E that we looked at, it said 0% vacancy. The housing ones obviously weren't a lot of help. They don't track vacancy on their statements. But no, I see no reason to give a premium cap rate. The conditions have been taken into account by our model, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
Yes, there are no, there's less townhome and row housing projects out there in the marketplace. There's less of them built back in the last construction phase in Winnipeg, which is largely in the 70s. Certainly many fewer of them built than standard market apartments. There's a lot fewer of them out there to sell, so there's very few sales of them. There's a number of reasons for this, but there is less demand from investors for this property type, given that typically there are higher expenses for these. There's more grounds to care for, there's more systems, there's more roofs, etc. Your risk as an investor is greater than it is on a standard market apartment where you're all under one roof with some same systems, etc. There's lower costs overall in properties of a normal apartment structure versus townhomes. That's one factor. So no, we can't point to sales in the current time frame. There are sales in the past that do indicate higher capitalization rates for properties of this type, but they're in the past and we can't bring them forward as being relevant for this particular assessment cycle. The city's model addresses condition on the income side, essentially, and down to net income, essentially, but it doesn't address the impact of that on capitalization rates and what an investor would be willing to pay for a property. So just logically, if you look at these properties and the risks associated with them, like we've gone through extensively, we're not going to cover it. Generally deferred maintenance, below average condition, less demand for the unit type count, all of the issues regarding social housing that I'm not going to delve into. There is a premium that would be applied in the marketplace. You have standard building A and this building side by side. Which one are you going to treat them exactly the same in applying them? Or are you replacing your hard-earned revenue? No, you're not. There's going to be a premium applied. And it's borne out by theory and market evidence. That's my summation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you both for your presentations today. That will conclude our hearing, and orders will be forthcoming.